Welcome to the broadcast. This is Michael Easley in Context, and it's my pleasure to have Dr. Meg Meeker on the broadcast. She's been on our program before. She has written some fabulous books. The first book of hers that I read, Strong Fathers, Strong Daughters. Is that right? Did I say that right? Strong Daughters, Strong... Yeah, okay. Really revolutionized the way I tried to parent three girls of my four kids. And then later, Boys Will Be Boys, So Let Them Be, and others. When Cindy and I were with the Family Life Weekend to Remember conferences and parenting conferences, we often reference Dr. Meeker's books. She is a global leading authority on child-father relationships. She's got 30 years experience as a pediatrician along with her husband. She has authored a number of best-selling books. Strong Fathers, Strong Daughters was turned into a movie, and she also has a podcast called Parenting Great Kids. She's done a TED Talk. On and on it goes, but the main thing is I just love Dr. Meeker as a friend and a co-laborer in the war. So thanks for coming on the program.
Oh, I'm very happy to. Thanks for having me, Michael. It's nice to see you again.
Great to see you. It's been a while. So what we did is we reached out to our little audience and said, okay, give us some questions that you'd like us to ask Dr. Meeker. So the first one was, how do I handle sibling fighting? I mean, sibling rivalry is so rare, isn't it, Meg?
It's funny. I was thinking about this morning because my 10 and 8-year-old grandkids, it drives me crazy when they fight. It just bothers me so much. And I think that there are a couple of things. Many siblings are going to fight. They're going to fight verbally, they're going to fight physically. Boys tend to fight physically. And often what will happen is they'll start wrestling, they're having fun, they're giggling, and you just wait, and then the tears will start. And so I think it's important for parents to sit down when the kids aren't fighting and say, guys, I know you're going to disagree, and I know you're going to fight, and I'm going to let you work it out. However, there are some rules. You can't say mean things or call bad names. You can't hurt each other physically, and you can't break any stuff in the house. Other than that, if I find that you're being mean and you're hurting each other, I'm going to have to separate you and if they're older, I'd separate them for half a day, because sometimes what happens is there's a kid in the family who's a little more than just, has a little more than just sibling rivalry. They're a bully. And when you see that, you really have to crack down on that kid. Also, if you find that the fighting is frequent and getting out of control, I would sort of ask along the way, is there anything underneath it that's sort of driving it? If you have a child who's a bully and they're constantly hammering on all the other kids in the home, you really need to try to figure out what's at the root of that. But that's a little deeper than just sibling rivalry. But sibling rivalry in general, I apply those 3 rules. And other than that, I try to let the kids work it out.
Adopted children are different. The attachment issues, attachment disorder, and so forth. But some of the designations and diagnostics make me a little tremulous, but they're also helpful. We had an ODD child, and that was a very interesting learning cliff for us, different than strong-willed. And so when you have an ODD that's, you say bully, that's really over the top, do they need to get help? Do they need to talk to someone who might give them a few sessions and say, this is how you kind of give landlines or guardrails, rather, for this child?
I would encourage the parents to talk to somebody, because a counselor can talk to the child, but they're not going to get through to the child like the parents will. Plus, they're not there day to day to day. Kids with ODD, kids with severe ADHD, and some kids on the spectrum will explode. And they have these episodes, they're out of control, they're hurting people around them, and you think, what has just happened? This is normal fighting. And so I think it is important for the parents to find a good counselor and say, what are some coping mechanisms? How can I set up some safe, simple boundaries for this child? And I think the most important thing to do is set up one at a time and really make the child obey that boundary, and then move on to another one. But that's a real challenge. It's hard.
A little easier one, perhaps. How do you discourage bad behavior while validating the feelings, in this case, of a 3-year-old?
3-year-olds in general are pretty happy kids, so it's pretty easy to validate their feelings. Here's one of the traps that parents fall into, and I see this with younger kids. Parents are so eager to make sure that the child is happy all the time. They don't want any conflict. They don't want any negativity to come in the home. And what that translates into being kind and nice. Say a 3-year-old goes over and pulls the dog's tail and the dog screams, barks, is to say, explain to the child, it's not good. That hurts the dog. You really can't do that. So the next time, just pat the dog. That doesn't work for a 3-year-old. 3-year-olds can't understand that complexity of talk. For a 3-year-old, you have to say no. In the moment. No, in the moment. They're going to cry. They're going to be upset. But then later on, half hour later, you go back and say, you know what? Can't pull the dog's tail. Let's go out and have some fun. So you don't need to validate the feelings in the moment. You have to reprimand in the moment, because what you're doing is you're setting boundaries for your child. And the child is going to hurt themselves if they don't have boundaries. They need to be able to listen to you when you say no, or they're going to get really hurt. And in that moment, you're not going to make the child happy, so don't worry about it. Being upset and being reprimanded is part of life. You and I are reprimanded and get upset, but you set your child up for a miserable life if you're constantly trying to make everything in their life positive, because it isn't positive. So parents need to set boundaries for the kids. The other thing they're teaching their kids in strong discipline is self-control. And that's a very important skill for kids as they get older into their teen years, and certainly for adults. When I see a dog, I can't pull the tail. Okay, I'll walk away. Child's not going to do that if you explain them to them and tell them that the dog really likes to be petted. So don't overuse words. Don't worry about their feeling positive in the moment. They're not going to. But you need to, crack down and say no, and then go back half hour, an hour later, and go have some fun with the child.
Okay, let's amplify this, because in a family of 2 or 3 kids, let's put that 3-year-old somewhere in the middle, and you've got the firstborn, and not to be cliche, more compliant perhaps child, and the 3-year-old's a little bit more of a tumbler and, bouncing around through life, and then someone younger. So now I'm parenting cross intellectual ability, vocabulary ability. So help me out. Same situation, but this mom or our mom and dad have got 3 or 4 kids in that situation.
Yeah. Well, you have to discipline each child according to their age. And in a general rule of thumb is the younger the child, the quicker the discipline. If you say to a 3-year-old, I'm going to wait to reprimand you from what you did in the grocery store until we get home. By the time you get home, that kid's not going to remember what you did. A 10-year-old will. So you discipline kids very differently. A 1-year-old, you're just going to pick up and move because they don't necessarily understand no. A 3-year-old, you're going to look them in the eye, you get on eye level, hands on the shoulders, say, no, you can't do it. Then you have an older child, a 5 or 6-year-old, who really knows the rules, and you cracked on them again, and then they get sent to their room, or so they're different penalties according to the age of the child. I wrote a whole course called Simple Discipline That Works, and I break down the ages and what you should reprimand for and what you shouldn't reprimand for, and then what the consequences should be.
Okay, we'll put that in the show notes. That'd be helpful for our folks to be able to access that. Let me move on, because we got some more questions. My oldest daughter asked, based on some of her friends and relationships, there's this gentle, respectful parenting it's kind of trending right now. And it says, help parents who are into this positive, gentle, respectful. What are the terms? How does that translate? You already alluded to it. There's a time to say no, and there's a consequence, but are we being too kind?
Yes. Short answer. Here's the problem, and I hear this from teenagers all the time. When you are constantly positive and kind, kids don't feel you love them, and they feel that they don't feel you love them. It's very interesting. They did a study on men in their 20s in prison, and they looked for a common thread in all the men, and it wasn't socioeconomics, it wasn't race. But all the men said, the majority of men said, when I was young, no one cared enough to say, no, stop it. So kids are like they're sort of like bowling balls going down an alley. If you don't have bumpers in the lanes, they're going to go in the gutter every single time. But if you want your child to go in the straight down the lane and get a strike, you have to have bumper pads they run into. That doesn't feel good. And so I think that parents are doing positive and gentle parenting, not for the kid, but for themselves. Again, they don't want conflict. They want their child to always have a positive experience. The way you learn in life is through pain. Now, I'm not saying parents should inflict pain on their child, but a child who is taught, no, here's as far as you can go, kid. If you do that again, or you call me a name, this is what's going to happen, makes kids feel safe. But when you're too gentle and you're too kind, honestly and truly, I've seen this so many times, kids don't feel loved because rules make kids feel loved. They feel secure because they know you're in charge. Parent is in charge. Parent isn't there just to, give them pizza every night because that's what they like. Life is filled with conflict and healthy conflict. Sometimes the way parents grow in their relationship with their kids is through conflict. So I tell parents, walk into it and show your kids how to understand that there's certain things they can and can't do. And sometimes when they bump into the bumper, it's going to hurt. That's the way it is. Don't soften it. Kids will disrespect that and they won't feel secure.
Your comment about the young men in prison, and I live with chronic pain and whine, 5 back surgeries and so forth. And I have come to the conclusion, Meg, I don't learn apart from pain. That, when things are going well and I'm happy and there's enough money in the bank and Cindy and I are getting along swimmingly and all my kids are, wonderful and love Jesus, I'm pretty apathetic, candidly. But when there's God allows pain, discomfort, disappointment, disillusionment, that's when I can go away from him, but that's when I need him. And that's when I'm more supple to learn. Yes, no?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that parents recognize that in themselves, but they don't want their kids to go through that. And they don't want their kids to go through it again because they believe their role is first and foremost to keep the child happy all the time. And that's a huge disservice to kids because you don't teach your kids resilience if they're happy all the time. And what ends up happening is that the older the child gets, mom and dad come in and they fill in the holes and they make life okay, and they make sure that the child's project is perfect so they get an A, and they make sure they talk to the coach and make sure that he starts on the team. Huge disservice. So teach your kids resilience, and the only way you teach them resilience is to walk in struggle with them. I guarantee you, that's when you'll have deep, resilient, healthy, strong kids. Other than that, you're going to raise a child who grows up and is miserable if you focus on positive feelings all the time.
Sometimes parenting is overwhelming. Okay. It feels like there are 100 things that need to be done to raise a healthy, whole, God-fearing child. Obviously, every parent and child is different, but is there a piece of universal advice, one thing you would focus on and tell a mom or dad?
Yes, and I love this because I've taken care of a whole generation of kids in my pediatric practice, and now I'm taking care of their kids. And so it's really, really fun. I've seen a lot of this. Parents worry about way too many things. And they need to get off the internet, and they need to get off all these blogs that have not very good information. A lot of it's wrong information. But what parents need to do is focus on the big stuff. Imagine you have 3 circles. At the center of the circle, the core, is relationships: mom, dad, kids, God. The second circle on the outside is important things we do: school, athletics, work. And then on the outside, it's fun, food, social media, anything. We tend to focus on that outside ring and just troubleshoot all the time. But kids are born for relationship, and that's what makes them strong. So if you want to be a great parent, forget everything else and give them 4 things. And even if you give them only 2, your kid's going to fly. All kids need this. The first thing is they need affection. Parents are so busy, they don't touch their kids, they don't look at them in the eye, they don't hug their kids, they don't put them to bed at night, and kids are craving affection. Teenage girls are craving affection. They need acceptance. You know, kids feel that they have to jump through so many hoops and get so many A's to be accepted by their parents. And then they need attention. We are not paying attention to our kids, and that's a huge reason that a lot of the depression, anxiety is going up. When you walk through a store, you go in a restaurant, watch the parents, just pay attention. They're all looking down at their phones. When a parent is looking down at a phone, the child feels invisible. And we have a lot of kids out there who feel invisible. We're not paying attention. And we need to be paying attention. And, you know, I think without that, kids just, as I said, they feel that they're not wanted, they're not loved. And I think if we really start to, you know, focus on that and just make a point every day of twice a day with every child or person in your home, look them in the eye twice a day for a couple of minutes. Even doing something like that can be a challenge for a lot of parents. If you focus on the big things, you focus on that center core, you focus on those relationships, don't worry about the car seat or the medicine or the immunization. Don't worry about all that other stuff. Just focus on the big stuff and your kids will do great.
Review those three circles one more time. I love that.
So the center circle is the deepest part of who we are and our deepest needs. Our relationship with one another, family, and our relationship with our parents, our relationship with God. That's where our lives should be and our energy there. The second circle out is the important things that we need to do to keep alive. We need to go to school, we need to work, things we need to do that are important to us, pursue missions, whatever. And then the outer circle, which is where most parents focus their energy and time, is on entertainment and superficial things kids should do. Should I have a cell phone? Should I not have a cell phone? What should I do with this? What should I do with that? What about this friend? What about the boyfriend? What about, and we end up troubleshooting on the outer circle because we're not focusing on the inner. And imagine, again, those circles, if you took the center out, that'd be a hollow kid. I mean, there'd be nothing there. And then if you want to go a little further and you put that center back in and you light it up like a light bulb because Christ is there, it overpowers everything. So
I was privileged to sit under Howard Hendrick's teaching when I was in seminary and many, many years after as a friend and mentor. And one of the things he said late in life, Meg, and it was striking. I mean, he wrote the book called The Christian Home. He developed the first class ostensibly in the United States on the Christian home and a little book called Heaven Help the Home. And I mean, you had, Dr. Spock was about the only child textbook you had in those days. And so he was speaking, this is pre-Dobson, he's speaking into this. And he made the statement, probably in the 70s or early 80s, he said, I think we've overstated the family, meaning we have worshiped children, we've worshiped the home, we've worshiped child rearing, as opposed to who you are in Christ and how that really has the greatest impact. Do your kids see your walk with Christ? Do they see your marriage and how you and your wife get along as a Christian husband and wife? Thoughts on that?
Oh, absolutely. I think that I would take that a step further and say that with all this attention and focus on making sure our kids happy and supplying this and supplying that, our kids have become idols. Our kids sit at the center of the home and everybody does a dance around them to make sure they're okay all the time and happy. And that's a terrible thing because when the child becomes the center of the home, they have control that makes them miserable. They see that all they have to do is start to cry and mom or dad will run to them and give them whatever they want. It's too much power for a child. But if a child is taken out of the center, God is in the center and mom and dad are right there with God, then the child feels very, very secure. And that's the way God intended it to be. I see this with a lot of youngsters and with mothers, and they're trained to believe from the time they're pregnant that they are that child's everything. They supply they breastfeed. Many women will leave the bedroom for a year and sleep with the child in one room and dad is in the other. And the message that gives even to a little infant is that I have this power. I can move my mom and dad out of the bedroom. That's a horrible thing to do to a child. A child wants to be second or third in the home. They don't want to be God in the home. And it's a horrible thing to do to kids, is to make them idols.
When you look back on, and I love the fact that you're now seeing your pediatric kids become parents and having a voice into them. 2 or 3 things that were the biggest change when you were a young pediatrician in your 30s and maybe 35, 40, and your patients were, and then now when you're watching as a grandparent, what have been the big 2, 3 things that are the most striking to Dr. Meeker?
Well, that's a great question. I think the most striking thing is the surge of mental illness in kids, which has really come in the past 15 years. Very disturbing to me. And I could see this kind of happening. Phones, social media, and this disconnection that the kids have with their parents. And I will say, we got to call parents to task here too. Parents are on their phones as much, if not more, than their kids. And when you drive that wedge between parents and their kids, kids, again, they feel invisible, they feel isolated, they feel lonely, they don't have healthy relationships with anybody. And so I think that when I see that, my work has gotten so much harder than it used to be, so much harder. I've literally seen, Michael, kids who've come in and have tried to commit suicide, and they admit to me that social media played into it. They'll admit that because they just felt bad about themselves all the time, flipping through Instagram. And I tell the mom, I say, they've got to get rid of that. Well, she won't. Then put the phone in the driveway and run it over with your car. I mean, if something is driving my kid to do that, and then they don't come back and see him anymore. No, but those are the biggest challenges that I have as a pediatrician. And then the anxiety and depression in kids, it's multifactorial, but they're lonely, they feel isolated, they're disconnected, they don't know where they fit. They don't have healthy relationships. Parents aren't showing them who God is. And all of this combined together, kids can't handle life when it becomes that way. I never saw that 15, 20, 30 years ago. Never saw it. And that saddens me because a lot of friends say, why don't you start backing off? I said, I can't, because, life is getting harder for these kids. And a lot of the younger pediatricians, I'm not criticizing them, don't know how to handle it. They just, because they don't want to go in and tell parents, you got to knock this off. You can't do that anymore, because this is what's going to happen to your kid in 3 or 4 years. And so they're big challenges, the transgender issues.
You bring that up. One of the questions was, that a parent has a child that is kind of leaning towards, I think I'm trans. So talk to the parent a little bit, and if that child was in your office, what would you say? First to the parent and then to the patient.
Yeah, well, I do see this. First of all, no child, 0, should be transitioned ever under 21, ever, because their brain isn't developed. They don't even know what they want to eat for dinner, let alone whether they should be a boy or a girl. Boys and girls very naturally go through periods where they think, gee whiz, our daughter did this. She only went to a barber for 1.5 years when she was in 6th grade because she thought boys really have it all over girls. Let her go to the barber. Let her play with boys. Let her wear Army Navy clothes, whatever. And then the kids all come out of that. But what happens is parents get so afraid. Oh, my child said, they think that they want to be a boy or they think they want to be a girl. What's the matter, doctor? They're just feeling that way for now. So let them ride it out. We also have, so what I would tell the parent is this, right in front of the child. I understand you have these feelings. They're just feelings. Most of them pass. And so what I want you to do is just kind of ride with it. And if when you're older, those feelings stay, we'll talk about it later. Transitioning children is dangerous. Giving hormones to young children has effects on their bone. It has effects on their brain. To take breasts or a penis off of a child is malpractice. And we will see a lot of lawsuits in the next 10 years, because these kids who've been transitioned will hit their mid-20s and say, what were you thinking? 85% of kids who have feelings that they want to transition during their teen years or young adult, 85+% of those identify with their gender of origin when they're in their 25. Kids who transition, however, have a much higher rate of suicide after they've transitioned. So parents need to say, I get it. You're having these feelings, but we're just gonna, we're not gonna transition. We're not gonna do anything. The number of kids who have wanted to transition 10 years ago was 0.01%. Now it's up in like about 15%. It has increased 4,000%. Now, there isn't any illness out there that all of a sudden increases 4,000%. So there's a fad. It's a fad. And it's a fad that the doctors and parents who always want kids happy, so they want to affirm how they feel. This is the destruction that it leads them into. It leads them into very, very serious problems.
Well, and it goes back to your comment about social media fueling so much of this, because apart from social media, we would not have seen a 4,000% increase. Let me turn the heat up on that question a bit. What if it's an adult son? So now this child is older than 21, and they come to you and say, Mom and Dad, I think I'm going to transition.
That's very painful. The difficulty there is legally he can do whatever he wants. I would sit down and I would show him some medical data. There's fabulous medical data that everybody should know about. It's on the Institute for Research and Evaluation, and put that link on your website. It's 5 questions parents should know about transgender. And it goes through hundreds of papers of the research to show that it doesn't lead people to feel better, and that at the root of the pain that the person is feeling who wants to transition is something other than gender dysphoria. And we do kids a huge disservice, 25-year-old, 35-year-old, to say, you're in pain, and you believe that your pain will be alleviated with hormones and sex change, and I need to tell you it won't. So before you even think about transitioning, would you do me a favor and go to a really good counselor? And be careful there, because counselors are told and physicians are told that we have to affirm gender dysphoria. And so there's insane. Help the child, help the adult get to the root of the pain. The pain doesn't have anything to do with gender dysphoria, because the pain doesn't go away after the transition. So those are the adult conversations that I would have with an adult, a child. Bottom line is, if that kid looks at you and said, Mom, I don't believe in God. I don't think God really made me a man. I think he made me a woman. I'm going to go do that. If you've said your piece, there's nothing you can do.
Parents and grandparents, the sun rises and sets on, am I a lousy father, a good father, a decent father? And then, the byproduct is these people are free agents. I tell parents all the time, your child is a free agent. You're the guardrail until a certain point. Probably when you give them a set of car keys, you're the guardrail. And once you give them the keys, literally or metaphorically, they're going to make decisions you don't like.
And if I could follow up on that, you think about that 3-year-old. Okay, that 3-year-old who mom always wanted to be happy and want to explain, and don't pull that dog's tail next time, try to pat them. If you don't teach that child self-control, and you don't teach that child how to obey laws and respect laws, and then you give that 16-year-old car keys, he could kill himself. That child has to know laws and boundaries, and that not adhering to laws and boundaries hurts, and it can kill him.
Your interest in fathering and a strong daughter, strong father, I'm sure, was incipient. And in fact, if you don't mind, your personal story, I loved so much when you told in that book about your dad, you overhearing him on a phone call when you were applying to med school. If you wouldn't mind sharing that, I think folks, if they haven't read the book, would love that story.
Yeah, I would love to. And the point of the book and the point of that sentence is that a dad has a power in a daughter's life and in a son's life he has no idea he has. And one sentence, one look, one activity, and this is why I hone in the attention and the affection and the acceptance, can change that child's life. When I was 16, I decided I was going to medical school. That was it. no partying, nothing. I studied. I went to an all-women's college. At the end of college, I applied to 20-some medical schools, didn't get into anyone. And I went home and I thought, that's it. My life is over. I have no plan B. And I was walking in my house and I heard my dad, who was a very introverted man, on the telephone. And I walked by his study door, which was closed, and I overheard my name. And I heard my dad say, yes, my daughter Meg will be going to medical school in the next couple of years. And I was stunned. I was stunned. And in that moment, because my dad said it, I knew it was going to happen. Now, I adored my mother, but my mother would say to me all the time, don't worry, honey, you're going to get in. Don't worry, honey, it's going to be okay. Don't worry. But she had to say that she was my mom. And that's how all kids think. You know, your mom has to be nice. Your mom has to encourage you. But in a way, we have this respect and fear of our fathers that they don't have to say that. But when they do, it will happen. And in that moment, the confidence that gave me, as I said, doggone, I'm getting right back in there. And of course, the next year I went to medical school. But you know, Mike, I've written 7 books. And at the beginning of every single book, I feel I have nothing to say. Nothing to say. My publisher was way off base in asking me to write this book. And you know what? I remember my dad's words. You are going to write a book in the next year or two. And so that's power. And what I try to tell dads is that's one sentence. You know, you focus on the big stuff. You know, giving your child that kind of affirmation and paying attention and watching. And my dad wasn't a PhD psychologist, and he had his demons he fought, but he was good enough and he'd got the big stuff right. And that was good enough.
You know, it's interesting because I'm 66 and proud of it. And the number of my peer men who I'm very, very close to, closer than a brother, they all lacked their father's approval. They lacked, you know, they didn't hear their dad say, I'm proud of you. And in a way, I think, in some small way, a lot of us overcompensated. I can still, Hannah, of course, hears all this, but I can still remember, indoctrinating her. You're smart. You're the smartest kid. You were so smart. I can't believe how smart you are. And then she became a smart aleck. So anyway, but we have a lot of fun with that. But the idea of that empowering voice, we greatly overestimate what a negative comment will do, and we underestimate what a positive, encouraging, you can do this. And not in the notion you can do whatever you want to be nonsense. But, I really see you're wired in these ways. And isn't that the point of parenting? Each of our kids is unique as a fingerprint, and this child is more skilled in math and science. This child has a hard time academically, but boy, they're good with people, they're good with space, they're good with context, whatever. This one's merciful and kind and takes initiative. This one, not so much. And so you're trying to find that spark, right? And fan the flame to say, how do you help that young boy or girl see a future for how God would use them?
It goes back to the circles again. At the center of the life is not encouraging them to be a great piano player or great athletes. It's about saying, you're created for a purpose. And my job as your dad is to help you find that purpose. And I believe in you. I love you because you're my son. God loves you as his son. He loves me as his son. And nothing that you can do will ever shake my love for you. Now, you're going to fail at some things, be good at some things, be bad at some things, but it's okay. That's the way it is. The thing I think that bothers people about what I said in the book, Strong Fathers, Strong Daughters, which is still very, very popular, women in particular, is that when mothers say something to kids, it's different than when a dad says it to them. But everybody listening to me knows that's true, but they don't want to admit it. They don't want to admit it. And that's why all the dads out there listening need to understand that there is a hole in your child's heart for God, but there's also a hole in there for you, whether it's a son or a daughter. And how many 50, 60-year-old men who you find out they're working to make more money, to make their dad happy, even though their dad may be dead. It drives a person. And every person takes one man to their grave. It's their dad, because they want that approval, from their dad. And dads don't know this, and that's why, Michael, I feel so strongly about encouraging dads. And now what I'm starting is doing online coaching with just men to say, not to tell dads what to do, but say, here's how your kids see you. Now, I'm not a dad expert, but I'm a kid expert. And if you could see how your kids see you and what they want, all they want is for your dad to overhear you talking on the phone about how competent they are. They just want to overhear you talking to somebody about how strong they are, how patient they are, and that, man, you're an amazing person. That's it. And that changes that kid's life.
Well, and I go back to the bigger theological construct, God the Father and the Son. And I don't think that's just a metaphor or an idiom, but there's a power there that understood well. Hopefully we, as dads, we do it right sometimes, but the encouragement is, even with my adult daughters today, I think, a word of encouragement for me means more to them in some respects. I told a story about my son. I forget how old he was, but I was at home back in the day when we got newspapers delivered, and I had gotten home from, taking my suit off, had my jeans on. I was sitting there with my glass iced tea, my newspapers. I used to get a couple of papers, the Washington Post and the Journal, when we lived up in D.C. And I'm flipping through the paper, having my iced tea, waiting for dinner. And Cindy was a incredible mom. We had family dinners almost every night, and she really was tenacious about that. But he's arguing with her, and it's elevating. And I'm in the other room just listening, and I don't even get out of my chair, Meg. I just put the paper down, and I say, "Son, are you arguing with your mother?" And he muttered some. I said, "No. Are you?" I wanted to hear a clear response. Yes. I said, "When you argue with your mother, who are you really arguing with?" And he mumbled something, and I asked again. He said, "You." I said, "Right." I said, "Do you want to argue with me?" And he mumbled something. I said, "Excuse me?" He mumbled something. "No." I said, "What do you need to do?" I mumbled something, and I asked again. Apologize. I said, "I want to hear it." Sorry. I said, "Excuse me. I want to hear it. What do you need to?" And, it took a few minutes, and he finally says, "Mom, I'm sorry for being disrespectful to you." And then I told the story. I never got out of my chair.
Fathers have a power in a teenage boy's life that a mother can't have. Mothers can't control a raging teenage boy. They can't. Remember what happened, I don't know if it was a year or so ago, in Louisiana, where the school was, I believe it was Louisiana, an inner city school of boys was out of control. The boys were violent. They weren't studying. The school was terrible. It was dangerous. 40 dads got together and said, "We're tired of that." So what they did is one man took a day, walked the halls. He didn't say anything. Then the next day, another dad walked the halls, and many of them were African American, big, strong guys. Guess what happened to all the violence in the school? It plummeted because there was a male presence. It's almost like little testosterone has to bang up against big testosterone to say, "Get in your place, kid." I'm not going to, but it's hard for a mother to do. And again, feminism has said, no, that's not true, but we know it is true. So just live in your role and enjoy it.
Well, since you brought up school, let me end with this, and I know it's controversial. I have said I just recently retired, but I've said from the pulpit of the church I just served many, many times the last 18, 24 months, get your kids out of public school. And I have friends that are public school teachers, and they're not very happy with me. And I don't mean it to be unkind, but the indoctrination levels, and even that caveat, private Christian schools may not be any better, but it's you have to take the ownership, especially these young moms and dads. You really have to be involved with homeschool, tutorial, something. Where are you on this, if you're comfortable responding?
Oh, of course. Ask me any question. At some age, you go, "I don't care. I'm going to take on the tough stuff." There's no question I won't answer. That's the beauty of getting older. Fire me. I don't care. American Academy of Pediatrics comes after you and says, "If you say these things about COVID, we're going to yank your license." Fine, but I'm going to say them anyway. Here's where I land on that, because I review a lot of school curricula, in particular sex ed curricula, which is very interesting. And the federal guidelines, or federal and state guidelines, are a little bit different. The states are a little bit different in each state. If parents could read all of those, their hairs would stand up on the back of their necks. Now, in some schools, in some public schools, teachers will take that and run with it. In other schools, say you have a Christian teacher in a public school, they will try very hard to avoid it. However, their hands are tied. And if they're in a liberal school district, even though they're a Christian, there are things that they have to teach. And there are things I would never, ever want my kids to hear. Personally, I would not send my child to a public school now. I would rather homeschool them. And I'd send them to Christian school, but I would want to see what the curricula are that the teachers are teaching. It's not that you have bad teachers. It's a political thing. You know, a few people at the top of the education pyramid are spilling down this stuff, this, woke stuff that says, we need to affirm kids. Again, it goes back to that pleasing kids. This is what we need to do to please our kids. Tell them all this stuff because they need to know it, and gender affirm and this kind of thing. So parents, if your kid's in the public school, you have to be on the ball. You need to know what's in your kids' books. You need to know what the teachers are telling them in school, and you need to ask your kids questions. Even if they have Christian teachers, sometimes their hands are tied.
Dr. Meg Meeker, author of 7 books, will have all the information in the show notes, as always, in the program. And I would encourage you, especially dads, the Strong Daughter, Strong Fathers book was really important to me. And my daughters were older when Meg published the book, but it reinforced a lot of things and also gave me some course calibration on how I think about them as young adults now. Love you and your work, and greet your husband for me, and just pray God's great blessing on you as you continue helping parents and kids with this next decade and 2 and 3 of generations. We're in a mess, Meg, and we need people like you that'll help.
We are, but our kids need people to fight for them. And that's exactly what I'm doing, because kids they don't know enough to speak for themselves, particularly this transgender stuff. They don't know enough to speak. So that's why we need to stay in there and fight for them, but also encourage parents. Trust your instincts. If your instincts are saying, no, I don't want my kid with that teacher, take them out of the school. Do what you need to do. And I also wanted to just, let dads know, go to my website. And I am beginning to do some online coaching with dads and groups of dads, which is so fun. Just doing what you and I did here. My kid wants to this. What in the world do I do? So